Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
Hello and welcome to Complex Creatures, a podcast where we look at all things spirituality and ask the question about how spirituality can be utilized for the public sphere. Typically, we think of spirituality as a means of personal growth or self-development or even the private, inward sort of religious disposition. But I think of all the tools that we use to navigate our world publicly, spirituality is underutilized. So I like to tease out questions of a spiritual nature that run across traditions to see how it can help us be better humans and citizens. My name is Jarrod Longbonds. I'm a minister at a church in Atlanta, Georgia called Peachtree Christian Church. I also like to call myself a theologian, have a PhD in theology, and I'm interested in all things spirituality related. With me is my friend Alan. Alan, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good, man. We're the time of year we're recording. There's a little bit of coolness back in the air, and that's lovely.
Yes. Okay. So Alan is a professor at a school a couple hours north of me. Are you technically in mountains?
I'm right on the foothills of the Smokies, yes.
Foothills. Okay. The Smokies. Yeah. It's a little cooler. We're here in Atlanta. It's a little cooler than it's been, which is nice. Super nice. But you are as a professor at a school, you are back to school right now. Are the students on campus? Is it getting crazy?
They're starting to arrive. We just did beginning of year meetings and classes officially start on Monday, which is 4 days away.
Okay. All right. Well, busy time for you. So let's dive into this. Today I want to talk about a concept called detachment. And before I talk about what that is, spiritually speaking, I'll just tell you a little story about myself. When my wife and I were going to get married, we decided we were going to talk to a premarital counselor. In fact, we were very interested in doing everything we could to prepare for the best possible marriage. So we sought a premarriage counselor who happened to also be she was a psychotherapist. She was great. But in addition to our time with her, we talked to couples that we admired their relationship. We talked to a couple, we took them to dinner. They were married 10 years. One was married 25, and then the other one was married 50 years. And then in addition to those three, we talked to our parents who, thankfully to this day, they're all still married. So when we would go out to dinner with them, we would just pick their brain and ask them about their experiences and their stories and what works and what doesn't work. That was just a very fascinating experience. And maybe we could talk more about that on another time about those conversations. But again, our premarital counselor piece was we went with somebody who was not just trained at helping people prepare for marriage. We went to a therapist, which to me was kind of a big deal at the time, Alan. I would confess that at the time I had I would say I looked down on therapists or therapy. I just didn't trust them. And I don't know if that resonates with you.
It does, absolutely.
Okay, well, I thought this is a person that was somehow going to turn the tables on me or use something. I just didn't trust them. There's maybe some reason there in my past, but I was hesitant. But more than hesitant, I was interested, as was my fiance, who's now my wife. I was interested in trying to get tools to start our marriage well. So we would go see her. And she won me over really quickly. She was a gregarious therapist and insightful. She had a way of being both gentle and direct in ways that could, get you. One time, after many sessions, we talked through tactics and tools and tips. And we didn't dig deep into finding out like why we felt the way we felt, like what happened to you in your past. It wasn't that kind of therapy, but at some point along the way, she looked at me after hearing enough about my background and my attitudes toward life and my anxieties. She said, "Jarrod, the day you stop caring so much about what other people think about you, I know you're going to be okay." Which is sort of a stinging thing to hear. The day that you stop caring so much what other people think about you, I know you'll be okay. I've heard that ringing in my ears ever since. I've shared it with other therapists I've seen throughout the years because I've gotten over my hesitance with therapy and therapists, having had good experiences. Not everyone agrees with that assessment or likes how she put it, but there is something about it that really still resonates with me. And I think that's probably because I am something of a people pleaser. Are you a people pleaser, Alan?
Absolutely. Can't you tell from all the things that I do for
Yeah.
you?
Yes. Well, I mean, tell me about your experience as a people pleaser. How does it make you feel, for instance, if you know people are mad at you? Does that have a particular thing?
Yeah, let's see here. What can I say quickly? So, when I was younger, if I found out someone was angry with me, I think I would do everything I could conceive of in order to keep them from being angry with me. I would jump through whatever hoops necessary. But I think somewhere around the time I hit 30, a lot of that started to change for me. And I don't want to get, too autobiographical. And I don't know that I have too many. I try really hard when we do this podcast to tell like specific stories because I think specific stories have more weight than generalized
Sure.
ideas. The only specific stories that I have running through my head right now have to do with me being mad at other people as opposed to people being mad at me.
Yeah.
But I will say that when I have experienced someone being angry with me in over the last couple decades, one of the main things that I've been doing is trying to determine if it's something that I actually need to solve, as opposed to just jumping in and trying to make it better. Because I've come to realize that a lot of times, not all the time, sometimes I'm an idiot, but some of the times when people are mad at me, it actually has much more to do with them than it has to do with me.
Yes, and even for someone like me who's been, advised that and told that from more wise counsel, in my line of work as a a leader, a spiritual leader of people, you greet people at the back door of the church, and they come at you sometimes with criticism or kind of a hot, like just a hot tone about something, and
Sure.
it will stick in your crawl, and then you assess it with a confidant or something, and then you hear that. Well, really, something is going on with them. That's more about them than it is to do with you. And as much as that gives me just an ounce of relief in my mind for a second, it goes away quickly because I feel sort of like, well, I still don't want to feel their anger. And
Yeah.
and I still feel out of sorts. It makes me feel off. So, like, as a pleaser, or however you want to phrase what we are, what that is in us, for me, it takes on the form of feeling like I'm in trouble, and I hate feeling like I'm in trouble.
Sure.
Just because someone's disappointed, upset with, or maybe just maybe the expectation wasn't met and it just left them feeling sideways about me in some strange way. Why should that change everything about how I feel about my life and my world and my day? There's a lot of me that does. It pollutes everything at times, and it really will make me feel as though my world were upside down, and that the immediate feeling is feeling as though I'm in trouble, and I've got to rectify it. I don't
Mhm.
want to be in trouble. I don't want to be called into the principal's office. I don't want mom and dad to raise their voice or send me to my room or whatever it is that parents do. My parents never gave me a timeout. That I can tell you. And I will tell you now that sometimes the therapist that I continually see, who's from the Midwest himself, he says that when he hears me talk, sometimes he goes, "There's just this really a good Midwestern boy in you." And he goes, and sometimes the way we grew up in the Midwest is it's really important to be a good boy. Go be a good boy. And it's this well-intended instruction, but there's this kind of underside of it that's not always parsed out, I mean, who defines what it means to be a good boy? And however it's patterned and set in your brain, if you don't feel like you're living up to that, it can bring a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And then, like I already intimated, it can make me feel like the entirety of my reality is somehow shaky or colored. And I just personally don't like it because as a man who's a husband and a father and a friend and all of the hats I wear in the world, if I'm feeling unshaky because of this one corner of my world, why does every other corner of my world have to feel that angst? Because I take it with me, right? Or why does it have to, or why can't those other corners of the world, those other relationships and experiences, why can't it help buoy me when I'm feeling bad about this other area? For me, this is just autobiography. For me, it's hard. And
Yeah.
it may sound like what we're talking about is just a simple issue of psychology, but I would contend there's some spiritual development components as well.
I agree.
I'm gonna pause here, take my pill.
Yeah, do you think? While you're pausing and taking your pill, I will tell a quick story.
Yes.
So one of the things that you just said reminded me of probably the most frustrating situation I've ever had regarding me realizing people were unhappy with me. And it was when I was the music director at the church up in Providence. And the scenario there was that I was replacing a much beloved music director who had been there for many, many years. And I think that I did not understand. No, let me restate that. I know that I did not understand the amount of grief the community was experiencing as a result of losing this particular music director. I went in thinking I was just going to do my thing because I've always, in previous music direction jobs, people have responded to me very, very positively, you know, and it didn't even occur to me that because I was doing things different from this previous music director, that people were going to respond to me in really, really negative ways. It didn't matter what it was I was doing. If it was different from this previous guy, it wasn't going to be acceptable. And so I got through my first year there, and you know, as I went along, I started pulling back and realizing how, because of the pushback I was receiving, and people you know, I had one woman in the choir tell me that I was destroying their church.
Yes. Yes.
And I tried to just keep a good attitude. And I had another person tell me that because I was a guitar player instead of a piano player, that, you know, I was incapable of being a choir director, you know, so on and so forth. So it was really, really challenging for me because I am a people pleaser, and because there was literally nothing I could have done that was going to make this situation better. The more frustrated I got. But, you know, there were a couple of things that happened there that really helped me. You know, one of the big things was realizing that there was nothing I could do in the situation that was going to make things better. And like I said a moment ago, didn't have anything to do with me.
Right.
And so, but the other thing that happened that you know, I'll tell you this one because maybe there'll be some judgment from the listeners towards me. The other thing that happened, though, was I realized that what they really needed was someone with a different personality than me. They needed somebody to be the music director there who wanted to also be a little bit of a therapist, and I'm going to walk through and be everyone's friend and mourn with you about the loss of this dude. And I'm not that guy. I just don't. That is not part of my makeup. It's not one of my skill sets. And so I left. You know. We found a guy who did do all that, and they're in great shape now. But it was realizing that was not the right gig for me. You know?
Yeah. Well, and in a lot of ways, what we'll be talking about with this attachment and detachment thing is that there's a way in which we can be properly attached. Well, we can be inappropriately or disorderly attached to things that it would be hard for you to have made the choice to go. But going was the right thing for you and for the organization, because it was just an issue of fit at that point.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I resonate with it. The thing is, the experiences that we are talking about and the feelings that we have are I think pretty tough ones to work through. But I would say if we shift our focus away from the people pleasing and how we feel about the opinions of other people on our lives, we can see that there's also some attachments, because that really ultimately what we're referring to here is an attachment that we have to the value or the way we're evaluated by other people or cared for by other people. We can also have some disordered attachments to other things in life. I think the easiest one, the lowest hanging fruit, is just talking about the commercial reality of our world, the attachments that we bring to the world of stuff. You know, I don't know, any number of stories make sense. You know, my daughter, she very much wants a cell phone because every other kid in her school has a cell phone, but I don't think she's old enough to have one, mostly because of the internet access. And for her birthday, I bought her a cell phone. It's still it's like in prototype phase, whatnot, but it's this phone that's designed for people, and it's for kids and adults who don't want to be attached to apps that connect you to, you know, doom scrolling, a lot of that stuff. So it's sandboxed. And I told her, I said, I'll get you a phone, but here's the deal. And I mean, to her credit, by the way, I could see her like go from elation to more of a sober thought to then hearing me out to ultimately then still being appreciative and still saying thank you. So I really, really appreciated her emotional, I guess, maturity in that regard, because it really isn't ultimately what she wanted. And maybe that's an example of her being properly attached or detached in ways that other people couldn't get to. Because that's us, you know. I mean, we all know the story of Keeping Up with the Joneses. I have a theory. I don't know. You've seen these new Tesla trucks driving around. I think maybe we mentioned it here on this podcast. To me, they're the ugliest vehicles. They look.
Yeah, I called them the Jawa trucks.
That's right. We did talk about it on here. They're Jawa trucks. I always say they look like they're not finished, like they were in the middle of sculpting it and they just stopped. But I said to someone, and I forgive me, listeners, if we said it here, forgive me. But I think people who hate them are gonna love them at some point soon. Like I think it's gonna turn the corner. You're gonna see enough of them. They're gonna represent some sort of status to people, and then all of a sudden, it's this thing called mimetic desire, where we imitate and we have wants from other people, and it dictates what our wants become. Now, there's a danger, obviously, to being overly attached to consumable items and things and material possessions. I mean, it's made a very decadent society out of our country and the Western world, especially in terms of justice. There's whole swaths of the human population that don't have enough to eat, whereas we throw food out. We have, you just go on and on and on with the sermon here. You know it already. But being overly attached to those things creates a false sense of wholeness. Whether we can articulate it or not, there is this sense that we have inside of us that if we just get this thing, then we'll be happy. And we turn our attention on that. If we just get, or if I just have or possess, then that's enough. That's enough for me. But I believe the research really does indicate that we really want what we want until we have it, and then our want for it declines. And William Cavanaugh is this Catholic theologian, works at DePaul in Chicago. And he's got this lovely book called Being Consumed, Economics and Christian Desire. And he says in the book, he says, my point is not to criticize the free market. It's just to ask if the free market's really free. And so how do we define freedom and so he defines it with Augustine and the Christian tradition against Milton Friedman and laissez-faire capitalism. And it's really compelling. And one of the things he just says in that book is like, we call it a materialistic culture, but it's not even really materialism. It's not true. It's not really materialistic. It's not a love for material things, because once you have it, you don't want it as much. And it becomes a thing that you can discard and throw away. There's planned obsolescence, and then you want something else. So he argues for a Christian materialism, which is found in Eucharist, and it's the whole thing about truly loving the material good. And that's a whole Christian spiritual argument that we don't need to get into here. But I think it's absolutely the underlying ideology to stuff. Mm-hmm. We really, really want it. We think it's going to make us feel good, and we have it. And that feeling of good or happy or whole, it lasts, it's fleeting. And then we want it less and less and less and less over time. And we want something more.
I have a quote I have to repeat at this point.
Go ahead.
Is not so pleasing a thing after all as wanting. It is not logical, but often true.
Spock. Okay. Well, Spock is the least spiritual being, but no, that's cool. Say it again. You got it. Can you pull it up real quick again? Say it again.
Yeah. Having is not so pleasing a thing after all as wanting. It is not logical, but often true.
There's something in desire. There's a lot of spiritual depth to the concept of desire, for sure. Attachments, disordered attachments. That's really what we're talking about today. And in the case of being, like me, a people pleaser, I think I do have a disordered attachment or need, some deep need for for basically the praise of people. And the problem is even when I have that praise, it never hits the target. It's a moving target, this happiness thing, or the good life, or however you want to phrase it. It moves. So I don't really feel satisfied, fulfilled, whole, or complete. The same can be said for material possessions and our consumerist society. But I'm certain that we have other attachments if we want to break it down into more nuanced form. I've been watching documentaries about the Hells Angels motorcycle club and criminal organization. And one of the things that they point out is this desire, this attachment to the idea of basically being libertarian, being outside of the society that they find hypocritical. It's sort of the seedy underbelly ideology to kind of more of a beatnik or hippie idea, because there it goes really hardcore into more right wing sort of things rather than more of a left wing. But still, this attachment, this desire to not be held down and I guess trapped by a hypocritical world of rules and laws and all that stuff. Yet to be in the Hells Angels apparently means that you have to follow an incredibly long list of rules that are non-negotiable. And that's the irony they always talk about. It's like it wants to buck all that, yet it can't get away from it in the first place. And then they show kind of through time how that attachment to that desire led to criminal activity that then led to like more nefarious forms of criminal activity, right? And it's become now one of the largest organized crime organizations in the world, not just our country. We can have an attachment and a disordered love of anything. It could be even of another person, right? Another human being. And it follows those narratives they're very basic human narratives. If only I win her affections, then I'll be happy. If only I, marry that person, then I'll be happy. If I only get that job, then I'll be happy. And almost certainly all these things don't lead to the happiness that we tell ourselves. And so in light of that, there is this spiritual sense or teaching called detachment. Very clearly in a very, cursory understanding of Buddhism, you find out that suffering comes from desire. Desire is this attachment to things. And so you need to give up desire. When I first came across those teachings as a much, much younger person, it bothered me. I thought, well, desire isn't wholly wrong, right? There's disordered desire. And I also thought, well, even attachment's not wholly wrong. Like you should be attached to your family. You should be attached to things that are good. You should be attached to the earth or whatever phrase you want to put. And so it really kind of messed with me. But over time, I understood what this is supposed to do inside of you. And in fact, I've understood now with Buddhism to be fitting in keeping with a greater wisdom tradition. And in Stoicism, you have a very similar sort of idea about detaching from things that basically don't really help. It would call the things that you think that are going to help, that don't, kind of illusions, depending on your writer, perhaps. But there's a very common or popular book that came out a few years ago that takes a lot of Stoic ideas and a lot of psychological notions, weds them all together. It's not a work of spirituality, but it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a, and then you insert the expletive, The Subtle Art of Not Giving it. And I read that book when I was on sick leave. I was out for 6 months on sick leave, and I read through like 100 books, and that was one of them. Mm-hmm. And as I was reading, I'm like, this guy has made this huge bestseller in an entire career of taking these philosophical notions from people like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and others, and he just put them into everyday speak. The expletive sells books. It became the biggest blog post he ever wrote, which then became a book because of the F word. And in there, he basically says, look, you basically are giving too many Fs. You're giving too many cares to these things, right. To other people's opinion of you, to other people's evaluation of you. You have to ask yourself, what are you giving too much of care about, and what are you not caring enough about? And look at it pretty plainly, and whatever you're giving not enough attention to, you need to focus on, and what you're giving way too much attention to for your ultimate happiness, you need to take away. It's a really simple premise. The book sells because it is a thing within us that we are all in some way trying to overcome.
Right.
Most of us, unless maybe you're, have psychopath. I don't know. But so I don't know. I think most of us are overly attached to something. And so there's this concept of detaching. And at first, on first blush, when I just hear you need to become detached, depending on how you use language, it can rub people really, really wrong. Sure. As it did with early Buddhism. It can seem like you're less than caring. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Although that was not my first reaction when I first learned of the principles of detachment related to Buddhism. my first thought was, man, that's exactly like the Jedi.
Well, I think the Jedi got it from somewhere, right?
I'm pretty sure that's true.
The Jedi being patterned off of, in some ways, off samurai. There is that kind of deeply in there. Yeah, the Jedi notable characters for, which by the way, I just found out their new show Acolyte got canceled after
Yes.
the season, which really bummed me out because I actually was interested in it. But anyway, yeah, this idea of our loves, our passions basically lead us to our fears and lead us to anger and lead us to the dark side.
Yep.
And I don't think it's a very perfect explication of Buddhism or proper detachment, but it's there, and it's in the cultural ethos, or at least the mythos in some way.
Exactly.
I started learning about detachment in like a very guttural way, like not intellectual, but like I learned it in a visceral way 2 years ago. So we're coming up on Labor Day. And 2 years ago, Labor Day, right around Labor Day, I almost died. I had a very sudden onset or realization of liver disease. It came to me out of the blue. I had no idea that my liver was in the state of unhealth that it was. And it took me down really quickly. And I went through 6 months of being on medical leave, just trying to get stable enough to come back to work and be at work with liver disease. And I did that for several months before I found out I needed a transplant. And then the rest of my journey we could talk about another time. But when I first was coming back, I started meeting with all of my staff members one-on-one to catch up with them. Hey, over these last 6 months, what's been going on? How can I help you? What are your concerns? I'm trying to enter back into their world without being like someone walking in and stomping all over everything they've done these months. And one of my right-hand colleagues said to me, how are you feeling? And I said, I'm feeling good. And I said, I just don't care anymore. And she was talking about people in the church's attitudes, opinions, their foibles, their peccadillos, all the things that caused me great concern and anxiety over my tenure. And I just said, I don't care. And she was real. I could see it bristled her. And I tried to then go, well, what I mean is I do care. I care about people. I said, I think I care less than I used to, because when I cared then, I cared too much. I could still see it bristling her. She was struggling with the words, and I was struggling with the words because I didn't know how to say it. But at the time, I think what I learned, and a lot of people who go through these near-death kind of experiences and where there are these crisis moments, they come out with a clarity of life that they also struggle to maintain as things get back to normal. And that's where I'm at now. And there are spiritual tools that help me. But when I came out of that, I had this clarity that, like, Jarrod, brother, you are caring way too much about like bickering. You care way too much about gossip. You care way too much about what people are saying and feeling. They have their stuff. They're projecting it on you. And you just are giving them all sorts of power over your emotional well-being and your spiritual well-being and all that.
Yep.
And then I learned also that people-pleasing attachment or attachment kind of sensibility that I had, Alan, translated to my spiritual journey, not just my psychological one, because the way I felt okay spiritually, and as a Christian, the Christian tradition, I would say the way I felt like I was getting approval by God was based almost solely on the approval of other people. And that was affecting me on a deep level. Like, how else do I know if the divine is okay with me? Well, in those periods of time, for lack of the heavens opening and God speaking with a deep, James Earl Jones voice, I would rely on other people. And if other people are telling me that I'm not enough, or I'm not making them happy, or however they phrase it, boy, that really made me really feel like I was in a funky place spiritually. And my intellect told me the opposite, but my feelings told me the other, that thing. And so I had it was like almost like an effort and muscular thinking to get over it all the time, instead of effortlessness, instead of being in flow. And so I'm sitting there talking to this colleague, telling him, I just don't care anymore. I just don't flipping care. Like, when you're faced with life and death, you see all these things as being silly. And it's a real superpower gift that you get, at least for a period of time. And over time, I had to be careful how I talked about it with people, because I could see that when you tell them you don't care anymore, it can make them think like you don't care about them, or that you're now apathetic, but that's not what it was. I was learning how to be better at detaching from things that I have disproportionately attached myself to or hung on to.
Absolutely.
It's all over the Bible. It's all over the Bible. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you, right? What is all those things? The people were worried about food and shelter and, I mean, basic needs. They weren't worried about vainglorious things. They were worried about basic needs. But then there's this desire, there's this teaching about seeking first the heart of God, or seeking that which is beyond you, even over the things we attach ourselves to, when we attach our sense of well-being to. Because there's no amount of stuff or even having your provisions met that's going to make you feel okay on a deep existential spiritual level. It's a moving target. And so I'll tell you that over time, I started, and this is going to be getting a detachment from a autobiographical level, but over time I started seeing a spiritual director. I was in spiritual direction, and each time I met with my director, I could talk about these experiences I had where I felt like I was with God, or I felt like I was growing in God. And then I was back at work for months. It was coming up on summertime. And, I remember driving to my spiritual direction appointment, and I think, well, I don't know what I'm going to tell him, because I said, I still believe what I believe about God. I still sense that God's there. I just don't know if I feel like in any special sort of way, this relationship of communing with God. I'm okay. I'm okay.
Sure.
And so he talked about that. And he said, well, do you see God anywhere? And I told him, I said, well, I think I see God in glimpses, but it's kind of like, my analogy is like, it's like coming down the stairs at the church building and turning a corner and then glimpsing a notion of God in how someone else behaved towards someone else. But I'd see only a fleeting moment of it. And I'd smile and say, there you are, Lord. Lord, you're still moving amongst your people. That kind of thing. That's the way I verbalized it. And then he looked at me and he said, well, Jarrod, he goes, it's really a gift to feel God and to feel communion. And for those of you who don't have a Christian framework or not, think however you understand being wrapped up in this kind of spirit, it's a gift to feel that, especially for us feelers out there. He said, but a step in your journey is you need to learn to detach from that feeling, detach from God. And that's what I said, detach from God. That sounds like the opposite thing you would tell a person who's a believer in God, as is my director, a believer in God. And he says, yes, you need to detach. But you are overly attached to the experience and the feelings of God. Now, you believe and know that God is there. God's not silent. God is present. God is moving. God's all around. God isn't like distant from you. Yes. He says, but the next step in your kind of journey spiritually is detaching from the need to know and feel and sense and all those other things, so that you can be comfortable realizing and affirming and stating, even if I don't have the warm and fuzzies or even the feeling of courage, and God's still there. God's still not, he's no further away. She is no further away. God is no further away ever. God still there. I don't feel these feelings. See, if I don't detach from that, then the feelings themselves actually sort of take the place of God. And in a Christian milieu, that's a problem, right? And I would suggest that in the world of spirituality, just generalized spirituality, we have a real confusion with our feelings. But that was my next step in my understanding of trying to detach more. And since then, I've been able to ask myself the question on a regular basis: what am I overly just grabbing onto to make myself feel better? What am I suffering from? And I look at the suffering as like, does it go back to something I'm too needy or reliant upon? And often the case it is. And it shows that I have a disordered attachment to something. And just in my case, the primary thing that is the approval of other people. For me, that's it. And so there's a process that I'm working on to not have no care, or to care less, or to subtly give a, swear word, but to rather care correctly by detaching. And so how can I then sit with someone who's very angry with me and also know that they're angry because of their own stuff, but then also not let that affect me, not let it become the voice of God in my mind? How can I detach from their need to tell me good things? How can I separate myself and say, I'm fine. I'm okay right here. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Trust yourself, Jarrod. You make good choices. You're choosing the good. You can trust it. It doesn't matter if anyone else tells you that or not. That's scary stuff, but it's spiritually liberating. How does that sit with you, Alan?
I think that I think that it is easier said than done.
Absolutely.
And so I'm hopeful that in the next section of this podcast, you're going to talk to me about the spiritual tools for making it so.
Well, I don't know that I have accomplished any of it in my own life, except
Sure.
for working on it. But I think that ways that we've talked before are going to come up again and again and again because we have a certain set of tools for spirituality.
Sure.
So I think things like our daily examine we talked about last and how to apply that examine, my little experiment applying the examine writ large are very helpful because I think a lot of this has to do with how we frame our emotions and how we frame our thinking. So we need to examine our thinking. Are we thinking in narratives that are liberating? Are we thinking in narratives that are restricting? If we can start from the fact that we never simply just observe the world in a pure objective stance. Like, firstly, there are elements to the universe that you cannot sense with your senses because our evolutionary bodies have not evolved the skills to sense them, right? I mean, just the notion that other animals see differently than we see and see colors and sounds and stuff, that tells you that we're not perceiving everything. So we're already limited at our access to the world around us. And then the way our brains actually work is that we actually fill out pictures of things. Have you ever heard studies about people who are blind from birth, who have been able to go through a process of then being able to see? We in our worlds think that all of a sudden they can just see as we see,
Right.
but they don't see as we see.
That's right.
They don't see a tree, they see a patch or a blob of something. You and I have been taught for years to see it as a thing called a tree, and your mind fills out everything that you know about it without even going through a series of steps that you can discern. So seeing and perceiving the world is very, very contingent upon framing. And the bottom line is we can analyze the stories we tell ourselves. Are we telling ourselves limiting stories? A couple limiting stories, Alan, are that we already started with if onlys. If we tell these if only stories, we can already know we're probably in big time trouble. But there's other stories. There's one I think we tell a lot. It's just an either or story. Like here are my two options: this or this. Like this sounds like I'm talking spirituality today, but that's actually a part of logic. The law of the excluded middle. Like there's very rarely only two options, right? There are so many other in between for truth or whatever. But we frame the world as an either or to make thinking easy, to make actionable items easy. But we miss a lot in the middle. We miss a lot of opportunity for the gray. So I think framing and is important, but here's the thing. You actually have to stop what you're doing and look inside long enough to ask yourself, are you telling yourself liberating stories? Are you doing liberating thinking? Or are you doing the kind of thinking that leads you down into dark paths? Another, and for the final example of it, is when we assume bad intentions by other people as an assumption. Like when you're a people pleaser like me, right, you're standing at the back door and someone comes in at you hot. It is harmful to just think they're coming after me, not there must be something going on with them. Famous story that I always tell in illustration is that like no one ever thinks of the crying baby. That baby's out to destroy my life. We make the automatic assumption the baby must be hungry, they must need a change of diaper, they must be colicky or what have you. But we don't do that with each other as adults. So, I mean, obviously the framing, the storytelling, and then the analysis and examination is very, very, very important. I think another thing to go through. Well, let me pause because I had a train of thought thing. I only have to cut this part out. I think
it's all good, man.
Yeah. Okay, here you go.
Yep.
I think another thing. So let me just back up and say that is about how we think. Now let me talk about a little bit about how we feel. I think another thing about okay, pardon me. A thing about feelings that is challenging is they are so powerful that we make the mistake of thinking that our feelings are truly describing the world. When I have that feeling that says these people are upset with me, therefore my foundation is wonky. That feeling really it really leads me to the kind of the sense that my life is imbalanced or out of sorts, or that I'm unsafe or unwelcome. The truth is I'm not unsafe just because someone's upset with me, or even if a lot of people are just disappointed or their expectation. Doesn't make me unsafe. It doesn't mean that my whole world is about to turn upside down. And so firstly, I have to admit that my feelings don't necessarily overlap with reality. That's the first thing, just knowing that, taking a notice of it and being curious about it. Curiosity is key to spirituality. Because if we're curious about it, then we can ask, what does the feeling mean? Because all feelings really are, I think, are data points. They're data points for us, just like thoughts and just like our sense experience. They're data points. They tell us something. They don't tell us everything. So why are you feeling that way? Which can tell you more probably about you than the world that you're in, the circumstance that you're in. But it's still a data point. And then ultimately, here's the spiritual part. Here's the real spiritual part. Because you could say all that was just psychological stuff. I'd say the real spiritual part is like becoming a friend of your feelings. Like, can you learn to accept them? Mm-hmm. So what happens then when I have all these feelings? I've gone through it. I've thought through it. Because I'll tell you exactly what happens to me. I'll be sitting downstairs in my den watching television. Everyone's kind of gone to bed. I'm going to stay up for another hour. I'm going to watch something. And pesky thought pops into my brain about these people over here who have been upset, whatever, makes me feel unsafe. Or meanwhile, am I counting all one of my colleagues would say, count the yes votes, but we're always counting just the no votes, right? So, and this is D Stone right here, buddy. She would say, count the yes votes. Well, I'm not counting the yes votes. I'm not thinking about the compliments. I'm just thinking about the gripes, and there's less gripes, but I'm thinking about it. And now next thing you know, it's making me feel like it's putting myself into a scenario where I'm like, oh, we have this sort of meeting coming up, and I can imagine it going like this, and this person saying this and them saying that, and then my response would be this. And then at best I'm shadow boxing, and I'm very effective with all my arguments in my mind, but the feelings don't change. It doesn't give me any catharsis. And it's just taking me down because I doubt that it's going to happen that way. Wow. What a thing to do. Ruins my night.
Yep.
It gets in the way of any spiritual wholeness that I want to feel or connection with God. It gets in the way of my relationships.
Yep.
And I go down this thing. So the first thing I realized is like, man, I did not need to be shadow boxing. Like, I made up a story. I went through all these thought patterns and all these things, and now I'm entered the emotional realm. So what's really good for me is just to be honest about it. After I've gone through the thinking and asking through the steps about my thinking and examining it, that feeling, oh, that's interesting. Why do I feel that way? Well, I guess I just simply feel that way because they're disappointed, and I really like to make people happy.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with admitting that, and that's what that is. That's why I feel that way. That's interesting. That's curious. Why? What do you think that is? Maybe you can get over that, Jarrod. Psychologically, you're distancing yourself from it. It gives you some space. It helps. But then, what if I became friends with the feeling? I can't change the feeling. Like, that's part of my psyche. That's part of who I am somehow. Like, the feeling's just going to be there. It's going to happen to me.
Sure.
I didn't make the feeling up. Have you ever thought about that? Like, these feelings feel like cats. They just jump on you, and you didn't know they were coming, rather than like making them up, right?
Absolutely.
So I didn't come up with you feeling. I don't know if I'm going to get rid of you. You just jumped on me. Like there was a point where I didn't consciously desire to dream you up. Maybe sometimes we do, but a lot of times it just happens. So how can I become a friend? How can I look at you and say, "Oh, you're sweet"?
You're sweet. I want to add this one little piece to this from the creative's perspective. I often get questions from students or peers about this thing that they go through where they've made a thing, they've put it out in the world, and maybe they got a bad review, on Amazon if it's a book, or someone said something nasty about them on YouTube or whatever, And I used to really get bent out of shape about that stuff. And and then what I ended up doing was reframing it in my mind. I think that it's exactly what you're talking about right now, which is, being a friend to the feeling. The way that I ended up reframing it in my mind was realizing that when I am critical of something, some piece of art out in the world or some story out in the world that I wanted to engage with, the only time that I ever actually say anything to the people that made it is if I think that they're capable of doing better.
Mm.
Like, it's actually a compliment if I'm telling someone that they did something badly because I think so highly of them that I think that they're capable of understanding that criticism. People I don't tell criticisms to are the people I don't think can do any better.
Yeah, for me, it usually plays out in like when I give a criticism, it's usually nitpicky, as I actually don't like I don't really like to criticize someone's attempt to do something. I feel like you should just do
But
things.
but you got to remember, it's part of my job.
Right, sure. No, no. Well, like when I'm helping a colleague try to work on like a presentation, I like to go, now these are nitpicky, which just really means it's good.
Sure.
Like if we're just
Absolutely.
talking about fundamentals, it's not good yet. And that's great. Yeah, that's a good point, Al. That's a great way to kind of flip the script or change the way you think on that. But when it comes to becoming friends with your feelings, then it also makes those feelings more manageable.
Yeah.
I love, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, you say what is mentionable is manageable. So being able to locate, talk about it
Love it.
makes it manageable, right? So if you can become friends with it, and my assistant said to me, and she had a personal narrative where she wished happy birthday to something, and then I was telling her some stuff I was going through. She goes, "Wish those feelings a happy birthday." Kind of like like just be nice to it,
Sure.
and I've been practicing that. It doesn't make them go away. It doesn't make them run away. Like they're like a pack of like coyotes are nipping at my heels. That's how my feelings are. It doesn't make them run away, but I can be a little bit stronger around them and start managing them more. And over time, it's like a muscle. So becoming friends is also important because if they're not your friends, then they are your enemies. And but I think there's a thing to think about there as well. And I really want to pull this out from the Christian singer songwriter Andrew Peterson.
Okay.
Wrote this song called, and I reference it a lot, so people might be tired of me talking about it, but it's called "Be Kind to Yourself."
Sure.
And I have a story about how I came to it through a friend. But when you hear Andrew Peterson talk about it, his daughter was having a hard time. He went into her bedrooms. She was crying in bed. He talked to her and said these things to her. And he came out and he told his wife, he's, "Oh, did you hear everything I said to her? It was so great in there." It's like dad of the year kind of moment. I told her all these great things. And his wife said, "Yeah, yeah, honey, I heard you. Also, that was all the stuff I told you last night when you were crying." And nevertheless, in the video that they have on YouTube for it, he is playing the piano and sitting next to his daughter. She sings with him, and his son plays the drums. And it's about being kind to yourself, which is really an important thing to do. And in case you might think that that's some sort of soft, gooey, liberal, sort of just happy-go-lucky thing, I think it's very spiritual and very traditional. The line in her song patterns the teachings of Jesus when it says, "How does it end when the war that you are in is just you against you against you? You got to learn to love, learn to love, learn to love your enemies too." And with that, we are reminded that sometimes we are our enemy. And if you are called to love your enemy as yourself, as a spiritual, theological, ethical thing, then it means you got to learn to love yourself and maybe make yourself no longer an enemy. So becoming a friend of the feelings is part of that journey spiritually, I think. And it also is effective at making it more manageable. Those are some tools. Undoubtedly, there are many, many, many others. I think a lot of what Buddhism challenges to, Alan, is meditation for this end. In a mindfulness practice, you can get the clarity of thought and feeling.
Yep.
And sometimes when you're disorderly attached, it helps to reattach to something better as a step in the right direction. And I feel like that happens in like the program, the 12-step program, we detach from our addiction to maybe the steps themselves or the community in the journey towards a even more healthy version of ourselves, our whole. And how I think this plays out, we can end now, but very simply saying how this shapes, I think, like our public world. I mean, and let me go back to that old spiritual director friend of mine, because we're talking on another time, and we're talking about situation that I found myself in with at work with some folks who had an upset and they wanted to do something else, and it was out of line on their part, and it felt really kind of like I felt a little disrespected and different things. And we're talking about it, and at some point he said, "Well, what are you thinking about all that now?" And I said, "Well, firstly, I should say that he wanted to know how God was speaking to me, and I just feel like ever since I got sick, if there's a spiritual message that I hear over and over and over again from the divine, it is, you're okay. I've got you. Even if I die, that's still the message. You're okay. I've got you. Like, you don't have to wail and kick and scream. You can accept where you're at. You can be okay where you're at. You can still be the kind of being that you need to be wherever you're at, and it will be okay. It's going to be ultimately okay. I've got you." And so just walk, just keep walking. That's the message that I feel like I hear from God. And so we acknowledged that. And then he said, in case, apply that to the situation. And I said, I think a lot of times when we have conflict or we feel like someone's doing something that's inappropriate, like a lot of the way I think is, well, I should probably find a tactic, a strategy, a certain set of skills to outmaneuver, outflank, win, positive manipulation, whatever you can do to get through it and come out the other side effectively. I was like, but what I'm really coming to in my life is I don't need to do any of that. Like, I don't need a strategy. My strategy is to be kind, to be honest, and to be graceful or be loving. You could exchange those words, like kind, loving, graceful, but like, be honest. People come at you asking something and they want something from you, just be honest and be graceful. And he looked at me with a little smile. And I said, I really think maybe I can even trust myself. Like, I don't really run fast and loose with people's feelings, right? And I make mistakes like anybody, but I don't make huge, egregious mistakes. Like, I don't go crazy. And he smiled even bigger. And he said, the more you grow spiritually, the more you can trust yourself. You take that for what it's worth. It really meant a lot to me to hear that. And I thought to myself, what would it be like to take that into our world? Take it to work. You take it to the polling place. You take it to talk radio. And I don't need a strategy to outmaneuver, outflank. I don't need to do an end run around people, bend the laws to get my side to win or whatever it is. I don't need to do any of that. Once I do that, I become less than I'm supposed to be. But what if I just go with honesty and grace? Be honest and graceful. Well, that's what has come out of me thinking through me detaching. Because if I'm overly attached to my ideals, well, then I'm going to manipulate like crazy. I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. So I think detachment can be a very profound spiritual tool for us individually as well as the collective. And it's something that I'm working on. And I'll probably talk more about it here as I learn new avenues and ways of thinking through it. Any of your final thoughts, questions, or what you want to drive the point home, Alan?
No, I think that's a great stopping point. I think that those are some effective tools for thinking through this. I look forward to figuring out more about it in future episodes.
Okay, my friend. All right. More to come. God bless you all. Take care.